we have with us the Dean Academics and also the Dean of Management and Economics of this esteemed institution. We are talking about Professor Dr. Naveen Das. Dr. Naveen Das is Dean Academics and Dean School of Business and Economics at Adamos University. An alumnus of IIT Kharagpur and IIM Calcutta. He has a blend of corporate and academic experience in Godrej & Boyce, IBS Business School, Hyderabad, Indian School of Business, Hyderabad, and NSHM School of Business and Management, Kolkata. His research area is strategic knowledge skill gap in teaching learning. A corporate consultant, a passionate teacher, advisor and coach, and a lifelong learner and researcher. Dr. Das has received awards from his alma maters IIM Kolkata for academic excellence and IIT Kharagpur for contribution in fine arts. Now, so you have this opportunity to learn from a person like a stalwart like him, all right? So we would start today's session with Professor Dr. Naveen Das.
Good morning, students, and welcome back to Adamos University. You know, very strangely, I know in most of your minds, there are parallel tracks going on. There are parallel tracks of two narratives. One narrative is that of the physical world, which you still remember. I had hinted to you that most of you must be remembering your first day in school or college. So that track is continuing. You have already entered the haloed portals of the college, though on an online platform yesterday. You have heard the dignitaries of the university yesterday who were there to motivate you, to welcome you. So that day is over. Today, in your narrative, the parallel narrative of your online world, this perhaps is a beginning of a new journey for you. I know those of you who have just come from schools would not have sat in a class which is 1.5 hours. Yes, 1.5 hours. All of your classes were of 1 hour. And those of you who were in your graduation perhaps must have had a 1 hour class, maximum 1 hour, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So maybe for the first time, this is perhaps your first online class. In fact, I would rather like to handle this session as a class. So sit back, don't relax, keep your mind on. And if you have not done it yet, please keep a notebook and a pen or pencil handy. I'm sure you must have already done it, but those of you who have not, I know you are all on mute. So just yell to your mother, your father, or your siblings to get you a notebook and a pen or pencil. And it has been, as I told you yesterday, it has been a red letter day in your life. I'm sure those of you who have bothered to check, or those of you who are historically minded, must be knowing that yesterday, 17th of August, 1947, for the first time, Radcliffe Line was revealed to India, revealed to the Indians. Why I say revealed? Because Indians were not aware of the Radcliffe Line. Something was happening at the back end in the drawing rooms of the British rulers, and before they left an indelible mark on India. Obviously, I'm not getting into the negativities of the line, but what happened was, and which I can relate to today with you, the Radcliffe Line defined two countries or two nations, the Union of India and the Dominion of Pakistan. And we all know, I'm sure you must have read in history, your parents must have seen perhaps as children, some of them, I'm sure. During partition, people migrated from one part to the other, crossing over the Radcliffe Line. So figuratively, your Radcliffe Line has been revealed to you yesterday. Yesterday, I think we told you that now you are adult learners. You have to take charge of your learning. In fact, Chancellor Sir actually laid down the culture of Adamos University, which will help you in becoming an adult learner. The member board of governors Two of them actually stressed on curiosity. One of them stressed on curiosity and this lifelong, learning urge. The other talked about the three C's: the courage, the compassion, and creativity, which will go hand in hand for all of you to become adult learners and take charge of your life. We also talked about the commitment. When VC sir talked about the commitment to competence, he was actually stressing on the various aspects, the new aspects of the university which are at your disposal to take opportunity of. And then finally, we also had a very short, brief virtual, you may say, virtual journey of the university, which was handled by our Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Ujjwal Chaudhary, who took you through the various nooks and crannies of these universities, right? So many C's you have already got yesterday. You might be able to gather a few more C's today. So today, in this session of about 1 hour, 30 minutes, long session, you are going to have a view about what exactly are our expectations from you as an adult learner. And why are we interested? We are interested because we want each of you to be a change agent for the society, a change agent for the organizations where you will work, a change agent for your families, definitely, a change agent, why only for the society of India or where you live, perhaps for the whole world. I would, or all of us would be happy to see some of you take up to some of the statures that I'm going to mention in my short presentation today, as well as the long class today. Okay, so be ready, gear up for this session, and welcome once again to Adamas University and to this journey of learning. Remember, this is just a glimpse of what you are going to face in your entire journey with Adamas. Classes would be heavy, classes would be dense, and they're deliberately so. They are planned to be so that the knowledge that you get in a condensed form, you will be able to apply when you get out and feel or touch the real world. That's also important. And not only just knowing and doing, you will also have opportunities here in the university to develop yourself as a human being, a complete human being. Some of it you have already, I'm sure, have grasped yesterday, but then grasping is not enough. You have to also hold them. So grasping and holding, just like a forceps. So yesterday, I hope you remember, when introducing the program, I talked about a laboratory instrument called forceps. So just like a good forceps, you have to not only just grasp the nuances of the university or the discipline that you are going to be a part of, and throughout your life, the stamp of the university will be there with you. I think that makes it very, very important to understand and grasp the nuances of the university and the discipline. But just grasping is not enough. You have to hold them also. You have to hold them very, very dear to your heart. Okay? So let's go forward. I hope all of you are ready with your pen, pencil, notebook. But more than that, be alert in your mind. Some of the concepts that I am going to talk about are going to be, I'm sure, handy and useful throughout your life. So that way, it is not a typical classroom session that I'm going to handle. It is a bit generic. It is a bit multidisciplinary. It is a bit life-giving, man-making. Life-giving and man-making were the two words which described Vivekananda's education, Swami Vivekananda's education. So what a great stalwart to begin the session with. I mean, remembering Swamiji. I'm going to have this harbingers of change as a nomenclature for all of you. As I told you, you, my students, my dear students, boys and girls, young boys and girls, you are going to be the harbingers of change who would emanate from this university and go to the outside world, the big, I won't use the word bad, it is a big, good world, and make it better. Make it better. Now, harbingers of change, the term harbinger, I don't know how many of you are going to or have heard this term earlier, but harbinger is a very strange word. It's not normally used in our colloquial or in our day-to-day parlance. We normally don't use harbinger. How often do you use harbinger in your talk? Harbinger is a old English word. Obviously, the origin is not English. The origin is French. Uh, I don't know French, so I won't be able to pronounce it properly. But I think it is something like harbinger with a H-E. So harbinger means the people who reach to a destination before others, almost like the vanguard of the king, the vanguard of the chief, who go and find out how that place is, do a recce, do a preliminary study before the rest of the retinue come. In the olden days, before an army went to a place, they would send a few people to go and check the geography, availability of food, weather, etc. Most importantly, whether lodgings were available or not. In fact, that is the connotation of harbinger. So I want, in fact, we want, the university want all of you to be harbingers of the change that we are envisioning, not only for ourselves, our society, but for the world, for the whole world. So obviously, this vision of change that we have for you and for the university is going to be our guiding light. And that's the reason why, again and again, you will see, you must have seen this at least in 2 presentations yesterday. We keep talking about, we love to keep talking about our vision. And the vision, what lofty idea, and what a great goal to achieve. We want to be an internationally recognized university through excellence. Whose excellence? It's the excellence of you and me, all of us. We are co-creators. Remember, education is a co-creation. If you are not attentive in the class, if you don't take note or pay heed of what the teachers say, there won't be any outcome out of this education. So education falls futile if it is not a co-creation. The word co here is very, very important. So your last addition or the latest addition to your list of C's, co-creation. Education is a co-creation. Through excellence in interdisciplinary education. We are a university. And just like the olden days, some of you must be knowing, education had its roots in the olden civilizations. Obviously, India, Greece, Sumeria, these were all the cradle or part of the cradle of early education. So in ancient Greece, they had agoras, open spaces where people would just gather, discuss matters, debate, sometimes even fight. Okay, sometimes even fight, and they would also plan to give hemlock to somebody, a poison to somebody. So I'm not talking about giving poison, I'm talking about giving knowledge, the beauty of knowledge. So right from those days of agoras, interdisciplinary, anybody, come all, come one, come all, everybody is welcome to this platform of education. Every issue, think of it, every issue that we face in life has multiple perspectives. Why do people fight? People fight because their perspectives differ. Is the perspective the truth? Perspective is not the truth. It is just one form of the truth. It is just one format of the truth. Is it possible for human beings to know all formats? It is possible. There are people in history who had multiple perspectives of every issue, and they didn't fight. In fact, they never fought. People who fought were very, very unidimensional in their personalities. So one of the greatest lofty ideas that we have for the university is that our students will be interdisciplinary in their education. That means knowledge, skill, and attitude. Yesterday, I think BC sir has talked about knowledge, skill, and attitude. I hope you remember. knowledge, skill, and attitude wise, you have to be interdisciplinary. Research and innovation are the two components which are very, very important for a university. And we want our students also to be engaged in research and innovation. Remember, as young minds, at our age, when you reach my age, your brain cells are going to start dying. It's a scientific fact. We can't deny it. But at your age, when you are young, I think innovation and research comes naturally in your minds, in your brains. So utilize them. We have the culture so that you can utilize your research and innovation capabilities in this university. Preparing socially responsible, well-grounded individuals contributing to nation building. In fact, the entire underpinning of my session today, later on when you reflect, is on this important component in the vision. We want well-rounded individuals. We want people who are good in their disciplines, no doubt about it. But most importantly, we want socially responsible, grounded individuals. Socially responsible. People who will think before applying their knowledge. Much of the issues that I was talking to you just now are basically for people, because of people who apply their half knowledge, little knowledge in wrong contexts. So be alert, be alert. And I think on the first session, it is nice to remind you of these lofty ideals with which the university has been set up. And obviously, remember, at the end of the day, all of us are worthy citizens of this nation. Nation needs you. Nation needs the young minds, the young bodies, and the young spirits. All three are important. So in nation building, extend your arm. Everyone's arm, everyone's help is necessary for nation building. And quickly, obviously, you know, it is not enough to have a plan. You have to also have a roadmap. Those of you who prepared for your class 10, class 12, or even degree examinations, I'm sure you must have had a plan, right? Always, I see young people writing, even I did it when I was young, like you. 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock, mathematics. 11 o'clock to 11:30, physics, because I fear physics, only half an hour. Huh? But that is a wrong attitude. You should spend more time in those subjects which you are afraid of. So wrong attitude is denying the problem. I'll come to that later. In fact, there is a beautiful theory. It is called the Kubler-Ross theory. Obviously, the spelling is K-U, Kubler. K-U, Kubler. Kubler-Ross theory. She's a Swiss-American psychiatrist. So she says that whenever a crisis comes, the first reaction of the human mind is to deny it. Just imagine, the same thing we did even for the pandemic. The pandemic was already in the world, I think in February, in January. Newspapers had those in the 5th or 6th page somewhere mentioned that, look, such a SARS is widespread in China, in Spain, or perhaps in the US. We just denied it. We thought that, oh, come on, it cannot happen to India. We deny a crisis. Then a time comes when you start accepting it gradually. Obviously, it doesn't happen overnight. It took us, I think, almost 4 months now to accept that this COVID or this pandemic is going to be there with us for long. Yesterday, I'm sure all the speakers, they said that be prepared for it. Just take it as a part of your life. So we have come to a stage where we have started accepting it. So first is denial. In fact, first is shock. We get shocked. Then we deny it. Then we accept it. And finally, we start integrating it. So quickly, it's a matter of changing your mindset. See if you can do that. Change the mindset of your parents also. Tell them that enough of grieving. In fact, that this theory is also called the grief curve. Kubler-Ross's grief curve. We were all grieving, right? In fact, many of us are still grieving. I find many of my friends, grieving. Why should it happen to me? Why did it happen to me? Oh my God, my friend, he had COVID, spent 14 days in quarantine. Hopefully he is better now. I hope he doesn't relapse. These are all a sign of grief. We have to come out of it and start integrating the shock producing or the awe producing change or crisis in our life and just get ahead in life. So be prepared to live with this and go ahead with life. So I was coming to the plan. So not enough to have just a plan, we have to also have a roadmap. So mission of an university. Tomorrow when you start working in an organization, you will see that even on the walls of your organization, these would be pasted. The vision, mission of the organization. Remember, vision is the goal that the organization wants to achieve, and mission are the roadmaps, the plans as to how, the nitty-gritty of the strategies. These are all new terms, I know. I'm sure many of you would know about all these later on when you start attending classes. So improve employability. Yesterday, I think again and again it was stressed that employability or improvement of employability is our focus. That is our path. How? Through futuristic curriculum and progressive pedagogy. Pedagogy is the method of teaching. In fact, this, what I'm doing with you today, is a new methodology, is a new pedagogy. We were not taught looking at my teachers didn't look at the camera as I'm doing right now. Okay? Or I as a student never looked at the screen of a laptop for getting lessons. But then this is a new reality. We have to accept new realities. With cutting edge technology, look at the power of technology. Some of you must be sitting in remote areas, far, far away from the studio from where I am reaching out to you. It is thanks to technology. And look at the power of technology, that it is almost live. It's almost on real-time basis. Just now, I'm touching my nose. All of you must be seeing it. Obviously, it is bad. Don't touch your nose. Don't touch your nose. Don't touch your eyes. Don't touch your mouth. Okay? That's a maxim. And be safe. Foster outcomes-based education system. Not only employability. Every course, every program has outcomes. You will come to know about it later, more about it. In fact, every course, when the course is going to be introduced to you, the teachers or the faculty members are going to talk to you about the outcomes. Instill the notion of lifelong learning. Some great men has said that a person is dead when he or she stops learning. Person is old when he or she stops learning. So old and dead are notions of learning. If you stop learning, you are dead. So I hope that all of us will be lifelong learners, because the day we stop learning, we will be anyway dead. Right? So a bit philosophical. The day you stop learning, you will be dead. And obviously through a culture of research and innovation, as I mentioned, collaborate with industries, research centers, professional bodies, and you will know more about these in the days to come, from tomorrow onwards, as to how we have organized ourselves to ensure that industry comes inside the classroom or inside the platform today, right? Industry should be a part of our teaching, because if the teaching doesn't have a bearing or impact on the universe, on the not the universe as a whole, the way we look at it, but at least the universe of practice. If it doesn't have an impact on the corporates, on the industry partners, then I think somewhere our lessons or our teachings will be ineffective. So anyway, that's what we should be very careful about. Our teachings and our learnings, even your learnings. Ask questions in the classroom. Ask about applications. If you think that something is very, very theoretical, raise your hand and ask questions in the classrooms. Virtual platforms also. I'm sure all these methodologies or all these applications have enough opportunity for you to ask questions in the class. So don't worry. The online mode might be new to you, but it has advantages which are more or less akin to the classroom. In fact, I would say that online methodology is better than physical classroom on a number of ways. All of you are my first row students. It never happened in my life. I have been teaching for 20 years and I have always had students who were backbenchers. But just imagine on my screen, all of you are my first benchers. I can see all of you sitting on the first bench, and that's a great opportunity. You can raise your hand and ask questions. Please do ask questions, because the teaching has to be and the lessons have to be relevant and up to date. Inculcate ethical practices or ethical principles. I think this is the crux of every education. The most educated people, and you will come to know some of them today. Wait. The most educated people are those who are principled human beings. People who have never taken the shortcut. People who have always placed the interest of the society, the interest of the nation, the interest of humankind above their petty personal interests. I know it is very, very difficult. And that's why ethics and values are not that easy. Why is it that we are talking about them again and again? Because it has to come from within. It's a part of your DNA. It takes time. You know that there is something called, gene mapping, where people know about your genes, and not only your, but the ancestry of the genes. But there is also an equally important research going on as to how you can also modify a part of your genes. Unthinkable. That's the wonder of science. Unthinkable. How can my genes get modified? Yes, it takes time, but it can be. Research is going on. So similarly, ethics have to be a part of your DNA. And you are at the right age, right mind, or right frame of mind, physically and spiritually, to inculcate them in your DNA. It's very, very important, because shortcuts, unethical practices can win wars or win battles, as we say. They can win battles, but they will never win the war. Battles are small fightings here and there. We had a scuffle on the Chinese border a few months back, or maybe a month or two back. These are battles. But wars are the world wars. We had two of them, fiery world wars. So you can win battles, you can have small gains here and there by the unethical practices. But at the end of the day, when you become more aged than me, perhaps, I'm not that aged, but maybe another 20 years when I become aged, or when you become aged at the age of maybe perhaps 70, 80, nowadays the longevity is increasing. So I wish all of you have a very, very long life. So at the fag end of your life, when you look back on your life, if you feel happy about a few things, these are the things you will realize were basically because of the ethical standards that you took, the ethical stands that you took, the ethical behavior that you displayed. Very important in life. And obviously, Mother Earth has given us everything. We have been nurtured by two mothers. One is our mother, who have nursed us, fed us as a child. Remember, as a child, you are almost as vulnerable as anything, as an inanimate object. You pick up a stone and throw. It's an inanimate object. It cannot resist. We keep throwing stones on the ponds, right? Just to see the ripples. Just imagine, a child could have been done the same way. It is mother who nurses, feeds the most vulnerable. But most importantly, or as important as the mother, and no doubt we have such beautiful verses in Sanskrit. So they are like Swarga, they are like the heaven. The other mother is the motherland, or the Mother Earth that we have for all of us. So being environmentally conscious, I think, is another aspect of being valued person. So keep those in mind. Very, very, might seem very lofty, might seem unachievable, but if you start practicing And if you have not been doing, start today, right now. Start today, right now. These are the principles of life. For the university, obviously, we have distilled all these into 5 core values, which obviously yesterday were given to you. So I'm not going to dwell much on these. The sense of respect, showing respect, positivity. Crisis would be there. COVID, maybe in another form, COVID 21, COVID 22, 23. Please don't take me as a doomsayer. I'm not saying that this should happen, but who knows? It might happen. Crisis happens in everybody's life, but be positive. The strong are those who get up after a crisis and start running again. You have seen that in relay races, right? There have been historical evidences where in Olympics, a person skids, trips, falls, gets up, and then wins a medal. Commitment. Yesterday, I think VC sir talked about the commitment not only to yourself but to the society. Your commitment to achieve the competences to excel in life. So commitment, accountability, be accountable, be responsible, take responsibility. It's very easy for us to say, hey, who is going to change the world? We see some ills all around us in the society. And we normally turn a blind eye saying that I am just an individual. I'm too small. Who is asking you to go and fight a war? I'm asking you to start winning small battles in your small periphery. Take accountability, take responsibility, and finally, be innovative in your mind. Remember, every crisis in life, in fact, life itself needs innovation every day. Obviously, on the lighter side, we as Indians are pretty good at innovation. And I'm sure many of you are fond of this word. I personally am not fond of this word because it has now come to have a negative connotation. And the word is a 5-letter word called JUGAD, Jugaad. So innovation somehow comes naturally to Indians. Just display that innovation and keep that spirit up. You will have enough opportunities in the university, not only to sharpen your innovative skills, but also to start showing results. There's an incubation cell where you can actually ideate and start a business. We'll be more than happy to see a Narayan Murthy stem from the university, or to see a Shabir Bhatia to stem from the university, or perhaps to see a Bill Gates. Who knows? Now, the vision, the mission, the core values of the university has a basis on the canonical form of education, which I would like to give today to you as the 3 virtues or the 3 intellectual virtues. Remember, in education, we are actually talking about the intellect. And the intellect is not just intelligence. There is a difference. Intelligence, through intelligence, you can win IQ tests. You can win the Mensa test and you can have some outlandish score on Mensa tests. But intellect is much more than that. The intellect has 3 components. And always on education, when we talk about any field for that matter, please remember, you should always go to the basics. That's another one small, suggestion that I would give you. Any topic, any discipline, when you start studying that discipline, go to the basics. It always helps. It always helps. The entire education system has been built or structured in that way. If you recall, you first learned the letters, you first learned the numbers before learning how to add them up, or before learning how to make small words. From A, B, C, D, you first learned A for apple. So go to the basics. And here, when we go to the basics of education, obviously the 2 countries that stand out are India and Greece. The cradle, the oldest, the most advanced, the most evolved cradle of education. Unfortunately, why am I showing a Greek face? I hope some of you can recognize the face. I'm sure some of you can, but for those of you who will not be able to recognize, the face is that of Aristotle. In Hindi, we call him Arastu. Aristotle. He's a Greek philosopher, polymath, what not. I think on most of human endeavors, he had already thought and given us something which will be of value for millennia. And he lived about 2,500 years ago. 2,500 years ago. Obviously, you would say that, sir, Indian civilization is much, much older. Yes, we are 4,500, and in fact, some of the research says that we might be about 6,000 to 7,000 year old civilization. But unfortunately, in India, we have always relied on the concept of Shruti and Smriti. We always had relied on the power of memory and the power of listening. And we failed to document many of the great teachings of our earliest sages, the Munis and the Rishis of India, who had such great lessons to give to humankind. Somehow we failed to document. Much of the documentation happened much later than the Greeks. The Greeks were good in documentation. Remember, we were all humans, and that is the power of unity of humankind. At the time when Indian sages and rishis were thinking about these big questions of life, at the same time, even the Indians and the Greeks were thinking alike. Unfortunately, the Indians didn't document, the Greeks documented. So obviously, I have taken it from the Greek philosophies. In their philosophy, they keep talking about the three intellectual virtues of Aristotle. The first is episteme. It's a Greek word, which means, and you know that translation, or maybe you may not be knowing, but translation is actually a very bad form of knowledge transmission. You cannot enjoy Gitanjali in English. It cannot be translated with the sense and the nuances. If you want to enjoy Gitanjali, you have to read it in Bengali. Okay? But unfortunately, that's how knowledge gets transferred and transmitted. So we cannot deny it. It is perhaps, if I may use the word, it is perhaps the suboptimal but second best way of learning. Second best way of learning through a language which you know, but the original was not written in that language. So translation is the second best method of learning. Reading in original is the best. So in Greece, they talk about episteme, and the meaning is universal, analytical, scientific, context independent knowledge. Remember, your 1, 2, 3 has the same meaning anywhere in the world. But the moment you start applying your skill and add up 1 and 2, it becomes 3. You put a plus, that is context. Addition is a context. The context is of adding the numbers. A new number comes up, 3. You add A and B and S and O, L, U, T, E, and you get a new word, absolute. The context changes. Each of these letters do not retain their unique, scientific, context independent, universal value. Each of them changes the value. The A of apple is pronounced as A, whereas perhaps another word with the same letter A might be pronounced differently. ATE is 8. It is not at, it is 8. So see how context changes the meanings of letters. Similarly, our knowledge of episteme, the universal knowledge, takes a shape according to the context. So context dependent skill is taught in the intellect as techne, the second virtue of intellect. The second virtue is the skill component, which we normally say the art, craft, pragmatic, context dependent skill or know-how. In the laboratory classes of yours in school, after your chemistry teacher taught you that when you put litmus paper in acid, it turns to a color from A to B. That was knowledge, episteme. You went to the laboratory to check whether sir was or madam was saying the right thing or not. So you started doing experiments and you saw, wow, actually the litmus paper changed color. So you started knowing how to apply knowledge in your life. But then this was a very simple example. This was a very, very simplistic example of learning litmus paper changing color depending on acidity or alkalinity of a solution. The example was simple because it didn't have any decision from your side. You just dipped the litmus paper and took it out and saw, oh, it's red, so it is acid. Oh, it's blue, alkali. Imagine a situation where a man does experiments in a laboratory, not like your laboratory that you have seen in your schools and colleges, but it's a laboratory which is called a human laboratory, where thousands and millions of a particular nation, a particular religion of people are put in what we call or what we now know as concentration camps. And this man starts doing experiments on them, very scientific experiments. You know, science has its origin in first a hypothesis in the mind, first observing. All of you, yesterday I think we touched upon being very observant, right? Be observant. You will learn so many things from the environment around. So science begins with observation, gets into hypothesis, then you test the hypothesis through experimentation, and then finally, if you have a repeatability of the result, if you get the same result again and again, in spite of the contexts, then you come up with either a theory or a law. A law is a much bigger, a law, which means it is universal. It would be applied anywhere you go. Whether it is Earth or the moon, the gravitational law will apply. You go to moon, there also you leave something from here, it will fall. Obviously, the speed with which it will fall will be much less on Earth. I hope some of you prompted me, right? I could hear telepathy. So this is science. So scientifically applied experiments were carried out in the concentration camps by this man called Joseph Mengele, a scientist. Joseph Mengele. He experimented on human beings in a crude way. And I don't want to get into the gory details, but just quickly, like cutting the limbs, upper limbs, and putting them in the lower limbs and seeing whether they still regrow. Like putting twins in a solution, a lethal solution, to see how long each one of them take to die. Does it mean that identical twins take the same amount of time to die? Experiments, right? Or breaking the bones and to see whether they can still regrow. These were experiments. Papers were written on these experiments. Papers with results were written and they were published in refereed journals. They were published. You must be knowing journals are basically high-end scientific magazines, just like magazines, but they are scientific, where people review and say, hey, you have written this, but do you think what you have written makes sense? Have you referred to people who have done similar work? So these are very, very scientifically driven methods of reviewing and then publishing. So Joseph Mengele published in refereed journals based on his experiments that he did in the concentration camps. He had all the knowledge of biology, life sciences, the science of death, perhaps. The science of death. By the way, I referred to one psychiatrist just now, right? Kubler-Ross. She has also done phenomenal work on the science of death. In fact, she has done experiments on something called near-death experience. Near death. People say that when human beings die, those last few moments are very, very unique. So she wanted to document how a human being feels in those last few moments. So she has done experiments on near-death experiences, and she has written on papers. She has presented papers. She has debated and discussed this matter in intellectual circles. But that is the good way of applying knowledge. Why do I compare, say, Joseph Mengele with Kubler-Ross? Kubler-Ross has given us, at least today you know now, at least two things which are so very helpful for humankind. She has given us a theory as to how we can cope up with crisis. I hope you recall, right? How to deal with crisis. First, you get shocked, so shock. Then you don't accept immediately, but you start denying it first. You deny. So shock, deny. And then you start accepting, and finally you start integrating it with your life. What a beautiful theory she has given us, Kubler-Ross. And then she has also given us theories about near-death experiences. She has done phenomenal work on death, or the psychology of the death. And just contrast it with another scientific mind, another great scientific mind, Joseph Mengele. He also was a scientist. He knew everything about life sciences and physiology, human physiology. He applied that in his experiments. So he also had enough of the technique part of it, not just the phronesis, but also the technique part of it. Finally, I think he went somewhere wrong. And that is the third aspect, or the third virtue, or the third intellectual virtue. The third virtue, according to the great Aristotle, and what a great man he was. Aristotle. Do you know who was his teacher? Yeah, some of you must have already guessed it right, or know it right. He was the great Plato. Plato was the teacher of Aristotle. Those of you who are from the humanities stream, I'm sure must have read about the Republic and the other treatises of Plato. And who was the teacher of Plato? Any guess? It was, yes, Socrates. So just imagine the lineage of great people. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. And by the way, who was the student of Aristotle? This I'm sure many of you must be knowing, because this must be there in history books also. Aristotle had a worthy student, and he was Alexander. Alexander the Great. Just imagine Aristotle, what a proud teacher he must have been, and what a proud student he must have been. That is how legacies are created. That is how lineage of great men are created. Even in India, we'll come to that later. I'm sure many of you must be thinking, sir, please give me Indian examples. Good. Curious mind. Yesterday, we were talking about the curious mind. So keep that curiosity on. The third, as I was telling you, the third intellectual virtue is phronesis. And this is, I was talking about ethics in my last slide. This is ethics oriented, value based, values and ethics oriented and based judgment. You are passing on a road and you see a beggar being harassed by a policeman. What would you do? You are sleeping at night in your house. Suddenly, at the dead of night, you see a huge hue and cry. A woman crying from the neighboring apartment. And she is being harassed and beaten up by her drunken husband. What would you do? You are in your class listening to a lecture like you are doing right now, and you are seeing a classmate of yours sitting very close, obviously in the physical world, in the past, not in the new normal, because in the new normal you will be sitting a bit far off. But assume that your classmate who is sitting just in front of you, close by, with another classmate of mine of an opposite gender, and he is trying to touch her inappropriately. What would you do? Now, these are the ethical and value-based questions that we face day in and day out. Day in and day out. How you respond actually defines you as a human being. And that is very important for being a human. Joseph Mengele had everything to do with intelligence and the skill. But somewhere he missed on this part heavily. I don't blame him. I blame his environment. I blame his parentage. I blame his school. I blame his teachers who didn't teach him how to be a human being first. This is the most important part of a human being, the phronesis part. And if a person, you are joining a university which has 9 schools. Yesterday in the virtual tour, and obviously I'm sure you must have already got a hint of it if you have seen our websites. The 9 schools belong to either natural science or social sciences. Some of the disciplines belong to natural science, some of the disciplines belong to social science. At the root of these disciplines, if you have now understood my 3, not mine, Aristotle's 3 intellectual virtues, you will realize that natural sciences focuses on episteme and techne. They say that, look, my experiment is valueless. It's only when my experiment is valueless, I will be very, very objective. Even as a master's student, and hope even as a graduate student, when you do your projects, you will be working on a problem or an issue, and you will be required to come up with a research and a research report. Your teachers will insist on the objectivity or the relevance of the research depending on whether your discipline is natural science or social science. I'll repeat, I know, because I have quickly summed up the philosophy. Remember, there is no fight between natural science and social science. It is the perspective with which we see the same phenomena. The same phenomena is seen by a natural scientist from the perspective of objectivity, whereas the social scientist looks at it from the perspective of relevance. Both are important. So a mind which is evolved, a mind which we think all of you should be and must be when you graduate from Adamus University, is that you will have the understanding and the depth of a human being, so much so that you can harbor these opposing views of objectivity and relevance in your mind and still retain your sanity. Joseph Mengele was a mad guy because he could not retain his sanity of phronesis. He was deep into episteme and techne, and he didn't bother about values. He didn't bother about phronesis. Similarly, if you are lopsided, if you get very much into just relevance, very much into, oh yes, but you know this is not practical. Oh yes, you know it needs a huge brain. I don't have that kind of a brain. You know, I am after all an individual. What can I do when this policeman is harassing the beggar? After all, if I go there, he might start harassing me. Oh my God, what will I do at this middle of the night? Let them be husband and wife. They will settle down the matter. It's very easy to take this path. But remember, somewhere it is the escapist path. We don't want our students to be escapists. It's a tall order. I know. It is a huge expectation that you should be standing for the values that you hold and grasp close to your heart. Like a forceps, please grasp and hold these values of episteme, techne, and phronesis all together. There is no question of or here. Because if you have an or in your mind, or, either or, then unfortunately you will be lopsided in your development. We don't want lopsided developed individuals. We want all-rounders. We want development which is an all-round development. An all-round development focuses on all these three. And why do I say, or why did I talk about sanity? Because the easy path is not to bother about one or two of them and only focus on one. You will find even among your friends, I know you are still young, you can still be molded. In fact, that is the hope with which we are inviting you to Adamus. We hope that you are like clay. You will be molded. So even among your classmates, you will see some of them very, very studious, intellectually bright. But then somebody comes to their home, a kaku or a kakima, those of you who understand Bengali, or a chacha or chachi, and this boy or girl hides in another room, doesn't even come out and say, hello auntie, good morning auntie, or uncle, kaise hain aap? Chacha, kaise hain aap? This is the soft skills that is missing in that student. He or she might be brilliant, first in class, but on social skills, zero. This is the person who will not even think once to go and protest when a student is getting bullied by another classmate. These are the people who pick up their bags and just take, in Hindi, the patli gali, the narrow lane. They don't want to confront. Remember, when you take all of them together, you will have to display the courage to confront. If there is ills and evils happening in the society, you have to confront. So look at the last line of this slide. Marx and Freud, perhaps they are the hallmarks. They are at the pinnacle of social sciences. I'm talking about a political philosophist. I won't call him a political scientist. A political philosophist like Karl Marx, or Sigmund Freud, a psychologist par excellence. In fact, he's considered to be the father of modern psychology. Even they stressed that natural science is worthy striving for. Two great natural scientists saying that, sorry, two great social scientists saying that natural science is a worthy stream or worthy area to strive for. Basically, what they are saying is that don't be lopsided. Please understand any topic from all these three aspects, from all these three virtues. So those of you who were worrying about Indians and Indian examples, here is a brilliant Indian example. A person who was the first Asian to win the Nobel Prize. Obviously, he doesn't need introduction. One of the makers of modern India, no doubt he was respected and revered by the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, so much. I'm sure many of you remember the picture of Mahatma Gandhi with Gurudev. He was a creative genius. Easy to say, obviously. With such copious work for which he got the Nobel, he must have been a creative genius. A supremely intellectual, not intelligent person. Intellectual, a supremely intellectual. Restless innovator. I'm sure many of you may not be knowing that he had one persona or one part of his personality who was an innovator, relentless innovator. Those of you who are from that part of Bengal must be knowing that he was the first experimenter with GM crops, genetically modified paddy. Yes, the scientist Rabindranath Tagore, and a superb craftsman. What he has created with his hands are still some of them still there if you go to Shantiniketan and see. Some of you may not be aware that he ignited the scientific intellect of people, particularly of children, with his book called Vishwa Parichaya. Vishwa Parichaya or Vishwa Parichaya was written by him in 1937, which was an introduction of the universe to the children. How difficult it is to write for children. Just imagine. So it is not that Rabindranath Tagore wrote for adults or for the grown-ups. He also wrote for children and many, many things. I am sure much of his literature, part of his literature definitely is geared towards, much of his small stories are all for the children. But he also wrote on science. This was the first science fiction written in Bengali. Some of the ideas that had seemed so crazy suddenly made much sense. Who is saying this? Heisenberg. Heisenberg, the person who was behind the atomic structure that you see, the entire atomic physics. He says that some of the ideas that had seemed so crazy suddenly made much sense. That was of great help to me. It's a great mind acknowledging another great mind. And we all know that he was a great friend of Einstein. He was also a great friend of J.C. Bose, who said that, Robi, if you would not be a poet, you could have been a great scientist. This is the maxim of polymaths. This is the doctrine of polymaths. They excel in more than one field. But excelling in more than one field should also have the last component of phronesis. And see how he displayed his phronesis, his value system. He just renounced throughout his knighthood, and he became from Sir Rabindranath Tagore to Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore. He renounced his knighthood as a protest against the 1919 Jallianwala Bagh. We as Indians, we know how deeply India was hurt, and look at this great man who was hurt so much that he renounced something given by the British. The flip side of the coin, the other friend, yet another polymath. So those of you who are from the social sciences know enough about Ravi Thakur. I'm sure this slide is for the natural scientists, people who aspire to be natural scientists, people who are joining us in the natural science disciplines. Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose, and by the way, he didn't discard his, he didn't renounce, but he showed his episteme in a different way. He didn't renounce his knighthood. So Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose, and very coincidentally, the two friends, they were very, very close friends. The two friends almost came to this earth at the same time. I'll just show you, just mark their date of births and the date of their, or year of their passing away. Almost contemporary, as if they had a pact up there that we'll go together and you just follow me by 2 to 3 years and come back after 2 to 3 years. Okay? Great friends. Sir Bose laid the foundation of experimental science in India. There's no denying that it was he who laid the foundation of experiments and experimental science in India. Those of you, once the lockdown is over and you join the university in Calcutta, please do visit Boshu Mandir and Cultivation of Science, where you will see some relics of this great man. He built quite a few institutions in this part of the country. I'm sure all of you remember the Crescograph, which was taught to you in life sciences in class 5 or 6, where you drew a picture of a plant with a string attached, and then there was some contraption called a Crescograph, a machine which would measure the growth of the plant. So he was the inventor of Crescograph, craftsman. He did all these things with his own hands. He built these machines. Scientifically proved parallelism between animal and plant tissues, a paradigm shift. Because before that, people didn't take plants to be living beings like animals. What a paradigm shift, almost like the Copernican paradigm or the Kepler's paradigm being challenged by Copernicus, or being accepted by Galileo and made popular. Obviously, he has to face the Inquisition. Galileo faced the Inquisition. Sir J.C. Bose also faced the Inquisition. Unfortunately, the Inquisition happened in London, and he could not, or he didn't have the opportunity to go and present. No doubt, unfortunately, again, he missed the Nobel Prize. Obviously, remember, we were a slave nation. Otherwise, it would have been he and not Marconi who would have been given the Nobel for what Marconi had done. Okay? So great mind, but unfortunately unfavorable to the world at that time. He was a physicist, biologist, botanist, archaeologist, institution builder, writer of science fiction, just like his friend Ravi Thakur. He also wrote a science fiction called The Story of the Missing One in English, but obviously in Bengali it is named as Niruddesher Kahini. Niruddesher Kahini, the story of the missing one. The first person from Indian subcontinent, the entire Indian subcontinent. And just a question, what was this Indian subcontinent like? What did it look like? It included India that you see in the maps today. It included Pakistan. It included Nepal, Bhutan. It included Burma. It included obviously Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and that is the stretch of the landmass that we are talking about when we are talking about Indian subcontinent. He was the first person from the Indian subcontinent to receive a US patent in 1904. And obviously for his work on millimeter band radio, those of you who will get into physics here as a study, advanced study, you will know about this unique millimeter band. I have a quote here, beautiful quote from his close friend Tagore. I have shown you what J.C. Bose wrote about Tagore, saying that if you are not a poet, you could have been a scientist. What an endorsement. Here, J.C. Bose endorses Tagore, and he says, Tagore endorses J.C. Bose by saying, Bose is celebrated not just because he was helping recover the self-respect that colonial rule had injured, and for leading India into Western science. Leading India into Western science. It's like going to a different domain and being a leader there. Western science was dominated by Western scientists. It is almost like an Indian going and leading Western science. But also because he was demonstrating that modern science merely reflected the wisdom, and the word to be underlined here is wisdom, of the Upanishads, that all is one. And here Upanishad is not mentioned as a religious text. It is mentioned as a humanistic, philosophical text of the oneness of the universe. You know, the two concepts of Dvaita and Advaita get unified in the Upanishads. And Tagore was actually referring to this, that perhaps J.C. Bose had that unique place where he could demonstrate the wisdom, he could reflect the wisdom of this oneness. What a great endorsement again. Flash forward 100 years. We were talking about the last century, right? You are all in the 21st century. We were talking about how the three intellects of episteme, of techne, and of phronesis combine in an evolved mind. My dear students, we don't want you to be having lopsided development in our university. We want you all to be evolved. So, flash forward today, 100 years from those great men. Today, if you see the world is a changed place, apparently. It looks changed because there is an element of uncertainty. Remember, you talk to your parents, and those of you who are lucky, I'm sure you have access to your grandparents, talk to them. And they would say that in the last 10 to 15 years, in this millennium, in this century, the kind of changes that we have seen and witnessed is mind-boggling. You will not realize it because you are products of the new millennium. You were born perhaps in this century, in this millennium, or at the fag end of the last millennium. But those of us who have seen the last century, part of it, particularly your grandparents who must have seen a sizable part of the last century, they would tell you that my boy, my girl, the change has made us completely change our own notion of the world. It is a mind unsettling change, not mind settling, mind unsettling change. It's absolutely uncertain. Yesterday, I woke up after switching off the television. Today, I'm waking up, yesterday I slept, switching off the television. I advanced you by another 12 hours. Not I woke up with the television. I switched off my television and slept. Today, I might wake up with the internet TV. Yesterday, I was watching my favorite movies on those big tapes on the VCRs with apparently some Dolby systems. Today, I'm watching my favorite film, which is yet to be released tomorrow in operas and in cinema halls, today on Netflix, on Hotstar, at the flick of a mouse on my laptop or on my mobile. What a change. Yesterday, we were waiting in the railway platform after getting down your grandparents' story, okay? Not perhaps your parents, or maybe some of your parents. You have just alighted the train in that small station and you waited there for half an hour for the bullock cart to come to take you to your home, because anyway, no vehicles were there, and even if they were there were no roads. Today, I hope, and I'll give you a happy example. Today, your uncle who is in USA hears about your admission in Adamas yesterday and gives a call, a video call to you to congratulate, and you are still filling up the form. Live. Sends you a flower bouquet, just as some of you must have already received from Adamas. Sends you a pack of sweets or chocolates and tells you, welcome to a new life. Welcome to an adult learner's life. That is the change that has happened. But obviously, tomorrow is uncertain. We don't know exactly, because yesterday is no more an indicator of tomorrow. Widespread automation. In any work that you do, you will see automation. Look around. See how your mothers or how your sisters have been relieved. And by the way, I'm not a sexist. I'm just saying as an example, because I have seen my grandmother with a shield and mortar, masala, pisna. I have seen her grinding masala for 15-20 minutes. I have seen my wife grinding it with a grinder. And I also see how much of time, effort has been saved. Obviously, I know there are many critics who say that, that is the reason why people are now becoming unwell. Much of my work today in office is automated, which possibly I had to do physically. Those of you who are going to be the professionals of tomorrow, much of what we are doing today manually will be replaced by a machine. Look at the chart to the right of the slide. Even in 2018, 2 years back, 29% only of the effort was machine, and humans had 71% contribution. Today, we are somewhere between 71 and 58. I can assume that we are about 60% human still and 40% machine, which will gradually, by the time you become a full-fledged professional, maybe in 2025, 5 years down the line, machine will be 52% and humans would be 48%. It is from a McKinsey study. McKinsey is, by the way, world's topmost consulting firm and a trend spotting firm, which looks into the trends of tomorrow and gets into documenting them for all of us. It's a great consulting firm. So some of you should aspire to be working for McKinsey. In fact, immediately after me, you will be meeting a person who has worked with PwC and KPMG, two more consulting firms, great consulting firms of the world. So you will hear from my colleague, Mr. Pradeep Bhaumik, immediately after me. So these consulting firms you should aspire to be a part of. They do phenomenal work. Third change that you are going to see, or the future that we see, is flexible and inclusive workforce. You will not have a fixed set of colleagues Your colleagues will change according to the projects. And it will also be very, very inclusive. For those of you who are sitting here who are my fellow gender, the males, I'm reminding you, the workplace will be dominated by the fairer gender. So hats off and a big clap to the fairer gender. You have been within homes for too long, ladies. Come up and take advantage of the university to be a leader. The nail polish in the picture on your right depicts you, my girls. Be the leader of tomorrow. Make the workplace an inclusive workplace. And males, be respectful and be, value-wise inclusive of this great component of ours, the 50% of us, humankind. You will also see what we call the gig economy. The gig economy means that you will also be seeing a lot of temporary work floating around. The job permanence is gone. In fact, our generation itself has seen that the permanence of jobs is a story. But you will see the emergence of a new economy called the gig. It's already emerged, but you will see the flourishing of the gig economy, where temporary small assignments, projects will become a major component of employment. And obviously the impermanence of knowledge and skill. So coming to that story, your grandfather will also say that my boy, my girl, my great grandfather had told me stories of a world which looked more or less the same as I have experienced. Same bullock cart, same shield and motor, same way of transport, almost as if the world was still frozen. Still picture हम खींचते हैं ना, frozen picture. So as if the world was still. The world became dynamic in the last 20 years. And it has become very, very dynamic, so much so that it is very difficult to cope up. But how do we cope up? How do we cope up these changes? Get back to what we covered in the session. Remember, the hallmarks that this university stands for are the saviors for you in this new world. Be an adaptive and critical thinker. Remain boundaryless and global in your exposure. In every class, ask the teacher, sir, what is the global application? Be creative, be collaborative. Don't be an individual worker. It doesn't work. It never works. Be a dreamer. But it is not enough to be just a dreamer. Put your heart and soul in achieving it also. Be an empathetic leader. I have shown you the values and the ethical principles on which you have to be guided. An empathetic leader has the values and principles in place. Just like the great 4 stalwarts on your right. And thankfully, I have chosen now 3 Indian and 1, yes, Italian, 1 Western. Satyajit Ray needs no introduction. Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, one of the finest human beings, not just a missile man. Satyajit Ray, not just a filmmaker, a scientific mind. Not just a creative writer, but a person who could get into the science of sound and light. Acharya Prafulla Chandra Ray, PC Ray, not just a scientist par excellence, a chemist par excellence, but also an industrialist. Perhaps the first scientific industrialist of Bengal. And those of you who are from North Calcutta, you would be passing Bengal Chemical when you go to South Calcutta. So, I would conclude with this great saying of Leonardo da Vinci. He said that I have been impressed with the urgency of doing. There is an urgency of doing. We have to do. Knowing is not enough. We have to apply. We must apply. Knowing, knowledge, doing, skill. But willing is not enough. We must do. And this must emanates from your being. What kind of a human being you are. Obviously, Leonardo da Vinci, he was a great human being and a polymath of the highest order. What not? A scientist, a physiologist, much of his drawings, a science fiction writer almost. Many of his drawings and scribblings are being used, and I hope you know that Bill Gates has all of them bought. His notebook has emanated into scientific discoveries today. And on the other, he was an artist. His Mona Lisa will remain perhaps for the next millennium. And this man is holding his head, G.B. Shaw, because he also knows the problem of education. He knew it almost 100 years back. He said, what is the matter with universities is that the students are school children, whereas it is very essence of university education that they should be adults. So I take the help of George Bernard Shaw to exhort that please be an adult student. Shed your Baba suits and baby suits of your school and college and come to us as an adult learner, because the university wants adult learners. Take charge of your learning. And even if it is a little learning, in fact, you should always be worried that the learning is little, because learning is boundless. There is a saying that the more you know how little you know. The more you get into the subject matter, you will realize how far the boundaries of the subject matter is. So both the quotes of G.B. Shaw are a reminder that we need adult students who knows the boundary of knowledge is boundless. It is infinite. So by remembering yet another great man, G.B. Shaw, Nobel laureate, 1925, literature, a person who was at the pinnacle of literature, but he was also a great satirist. And in his Nobel, acceptance speech, he has obviously thanked everybody before him. So that is what great men are. They know that they are riding on the shoulders of great men who have come earlier. But more important than that, in his Nobel citation, he is said to be having the beauty of poetry, a satire which has the beauty of poetry. Just imagine, satire and the beauty of poetry. So with that, my boys and girls, I will end, but don't go away. I have a very important task to do here. The next session will be handled by my colleague, Mr. Pradeep Bhomik, a consultant par excellence. Here, he is the vice president of the Chancellor's Cell, and he looks after the strategic aspects of the university. As I told you, he is a consultant. He was a consultant with PwC and KPMG, and he has done phenomenal work in the field of consulting as partner and as senior partner. He has handled the P&L of practices while in the consulting firm, and today he is with us, who is going to handle blended learning for you. It's very important component of our new normal. Learning will not be like it was yesterday. So he is going to expose you to the concept of blended learning in his inimitable way, in his unique way. By the way, he is a product of one of the oldest engineering colleges of India. He's a BE from Shivpur BE College, which now is called BESU, Bengal Engineering and Science University. Okay, South Pointer. So over to Mr. Pradeep Bhomik. And thank you very much, my students, for having the patience. I hope you have taken copious notes. I'm going to check all of them once I meet you. Okay, or maybe I'll create an opportunity to meet all of you and check what have you learned with this lecture? Thank you very much. Stay safe and be happy and be a good human being. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Can you